Okay. Well, hello everyone. Good evening and welcome to the fourth in our Hertford Responds series. And tonight it's with Professor Anette Mikes, the Professor of Accounting and Risk Management at the Saïd Business School, and also about to become the principal investigator on corporate ownership and corporate purpose, a really important project, which I, of course, related to because I co-chair the Purposeful Company Task Force, which I shall carry on doing once I've left Hertford in the autumn. Annette's going to talk for about 35-40 minutes with a brilliant slideshow. I've already been privileged to see it. She's going to walk you through risk, cultures of risk, and implications for business and government and policy, given this extraordinary COVID pandemic through which we're living. So I don't think there's no more to do. I'm going to occasionally, I will chip in with a comment. You do know the rules, of you have been on it before. I mean, if you have a question to put to Annette, if you just run your cursor onto the toolbar, you'll see there's a Q&A section. Just right-click on that and ask your question, and I will pass it on to Annette when we get to the Q&A session. So we're aiming to wrap up at 6:15, but without any more ado, I've said that twice, and I'm not going to say it a third time. Over to you.
Thank you, Bill, and good afternoon, everyone. My humble purpose is to perhaps try to show you this COVID-19 event that we are all living through a new frame, the frame that I have been privileged to see through a risk management lens, and hopefully show you that risk management is broader than just a narrow technical assessment of the risks. In fact, in order to understand COVID-19 as a risk event, we need to broaden the notion of risks to encompass the notion of values and purpose as well. So we are going to build bridges between notions of risk management and notions of ethics. I'm just going to share my screen so I can share this much anticipated presentation with you. And there we are. So I believe both Will and I are sitting or standing in Oxford at this moment, where on the surface of things, nothing really has changed. Although we know very well that underneath the surface, there are some profound changes on the way here too. About 1 out of 4 Oxford employees are furloughed at the moment. They are being part of the 9 million people in the UK on furlough. But also, despite this economic stillness in activity here, there is furious research activity going on in various departments of the university, activities around testing, vaccine development, tracing technologies, encompassing researches across 20 departments. As I said, the COVID-19 crisis has thrown us into not just a public health crisis, but also in an economic crisis. The UK is not alone in suffering. The US has logged 40 million unemployment benefit applications, and many other countries are suffering around the world, including those in more unequal and less fortunate economies than our own. So inequalities are on the rise, whether that be income or racial inequalities, which have been brought to the fore here in Oxford and elsewhere around the world too. So in today's session, I would like to bring you perhaps a different understanding of the nature of this crisis as I talk about it as a risk event and what it implies about its manageability and what are its implications for leadership. And leadership here could mean leadership at national level or at the level of companies, or you can think of it leadership at the level of your own operations or within your own family. So we are sharing these problems at all levels of social existence. Starting from a risk management point of view, there are two things that are startling about this event. On the one hand, there is no shortage in risk management practices, tools, and risk management anticipation out there. Most companies have been well prepared in terms of standard risk management for coping with events that can throw them off track, that can prevent them from the achievement of their strategic objectives. So generally, there is this discipline risk management that has also been adopted by many governments around the world. And by the standards of routine risk management, many organizations have been prepared, or so they thought. And that's because most of risk management focuses on events that we have experienced already. So we can develop processes and routines and playbooks to employ should those events arise. In fact, if you look across most corporations or most government departments, they would be able to talk the same language and talk about operational and compliance risks. On the one hand, these are risks that are really bad risks, that taking these risks gives us no strategic benefit. So they would have many processes and controls in place to mitigate and prevent these occurrences from happening. There are strategy risks that are good risks, that are understood to be beneficial risks. And in fact, we couldn't pursue any novel projects, any innovation without taking a degree of strategic risks. We have some control over these risks as well. And for controlling strategy risk, we have got a sophisticated repertoire of risk identification tools, risk measurement tools, risk maps, and so on. And then finally, there is a category of external risks that most risk managers and leaders have been thinking about. External risks would involve events that are outside the control of their organization. And they would have been practicing scenario planning and wargaming and contingency planning that would help them to prepare for these events. They won't help them to prevent these events necessarily, but they would give them more resilience should these events happen. The second observation I would like to make is that despite all this risk management preparedness, COVID-19 has struck most of us and most organizations, most risk managers as profoundly novel, and we have found ourselves rather unprepared. Now, why is that? From a risk management perspective, it has to do with the nature of the event. So how is this event different? It has some characteristics that set it apart from the kind of risks that we are able to prepare for. COVID-19 is profoundly novel in that the end is not in sight. We don't know what the end game is going to look like. There are a lot of uncertainties around this that are completely beyond our comprehension. We can't really predict how it's going to unfold. So this level of uncertainty that we are facing is way beyond the degree of uncertainty that risk managers or anyone is normally able to think about. So what it means for leadership is that routine management processes and routine risk management processes won't be that helpful. The routine risk management processes would involve some kind of preparedness that allows managers and decision makers to categorize and differentiate different risk issues using traffic light charts, risk maps such as this one. So somewhere on charts like this and risk maps like this, there would be a red risk suggesting there could be a pandemic, some sort of epidemic, that a public health event that could be detrimental to the operation of most organizations. In fact, the UK government had such an event on its own risk map. Now, what's new about this pandemic is that it's in terms of its impact and in terms of its probability of occurrence, this kind of event lies beyond what risk maps have been capturing. Risk maps have been capturing much more localized incidents, health incidents, such as the avian flu incident in 1997, or the SARS incident in 2003, and some others that occurred over the years, but they remained fairly localized in their impact and spread. What we are having now, we have been thrown into another part of the risk universe in terms of the uncertainties that we are facing, into the realm of what Bob Kaplan, Dutch Leonard, and I in a recent Harvard Business Review paper call the realm of novel risks. So in this space, we find risks that have got characteristics that make them anything but routine. So to describe events in the novel risk space, we have got some metaphors that we can reach for. We can talk about black swans, perfect storms, and tsunami risks. So I'm using these metaphors. I'm going to give you some examples. So black swan events are events that we haven't seen before. So no one could have foreseen them, or at least they are defined in terms of the experience of the onlooker, of the risk bearer. So for example, in the case of the great financial crisis, the systematic meltdown of the US subprime mortgage market constituted a black swan for many organizations. For many organizations who believe that to experience a more than 5% drop in US house prices is beyond the imaginable scenarios. So for most organizations, this was a black swan event. Now in brackets, I would like to highlight that black swans are in the eye of the beholder. So some organizations were able to envision the possibility of a 5% drop in US house prices, and indeed made preparations and even managed to perform a profitable exit. The second type of novel event we call perfect storms. So the novelty here isn't in the events themselves. Perfect storms arise from a combination of already familiar risks, but they combine in such novel and unusual way that together they bring about a real negative surprise. So perfect storms can happen when an organization engages in too many complex, innovative tasks. For example, Boeing's fiasco, a series of fiascos with the Dreamliner airplane, for example, was the result of the company taking on too many new complexities together. So new supply chain, new materials for the airplane, new engine, new battery technology. Individually, these systems challenges were tractable, but in combination, they became too much for the organization to handle. And then finally, tsunami risks. We use this metaphor to illustrate risks that occur at such a speed and at such a scale that it overwhelms respondents and preparedness that has taken place before. And we are using the tsunami metaphor because one of the prime examples for this in living memory was the Fukushima nuclear meltdown incident. So thinking about COVID-19, we probably see that it combines characteristics of all these different types of novel events, but for me, it's more familiar, it's more akin to tsunami risk. So we have got a public health event that takes place at such a speed and on such a scale that it overwhelms our public health ability to control it. So what do we do in situations like this? What's needed is crisis leadership. This is no longer routine management. It's a kind of management that takes place under high stress with no clear end game or exit in sight. It's temporary, but is likely to last an indefinite period. The stress comes from the fact that we have no pre-cooked answers. We have no playbook to act out. We have to figure out what we're doing in real time under this stress. So what leaders can aim for at best in situations like this is to make good enough decisions soon enough that they make a difference. They have to communicate these decisions well enough and enact them, carry them out well enough to give a temporary relief to the situation so that they can assess whether these actions were effective or not and act again, make decisions again and act again. An important leadership lesson that crisis managers have picked up comes from a US admiral, James Stockdale. In his youth, he was a fighter. He was an airplane fighter pilot, I believe, in the Vietnam War, and he got shot down over North Vietnam, after which he spent 7 years in a prisoner of war camp. It's him whom we associate with a leadership paradox, an adage according to which in situations of real deep crisis, leaders need to be brutally honest about the situation. But at the same time, paradoxically, they have to find a way to give a realistic basis for hope, to create a narrative that allows people to see some way out, but not trying to give a rose-tinted lens, because false hope would be detrimental. Another implication of the Stockdale paradox is that leaders must resist giving quick answers. Those are counterproductive because they need to be in a mode of trying to learn, given the amount of uncertainties that they are facing in crisis situations. So what can they do process-wise? They can build processes that help them to learn and model through the situation. So the key to building these processes is to create an oversight process with an incident management group. Will knows this. We have this at our own college, and most organizations modeling through the COVID situation, as well as the government, has its own COBRA team, its own incident management team, which is trying to assess and oversee this event as a whole. The role of that oversight team is to make decisions after identifying issues and priorities. Their job is not so much about giving the answers, because the answers are given to them by expert groups that they have to draw on. Their job is to ask the right questions and frame the problems to which answers are being solved. So their job is to delegate problem solving to different expert groups that they have to identify and move in and out of the picture as the situation demands. What comes next? Crisis leadership has identified a process that's quite different from routine decision making. This is called iterative and agile problem solving. Notice that it doesn't start with identifying option A and option B that give us a choice. No, iterative agile problem solving starts with core values. It starts with moral reasoning. It starts from the recognition that at a time of crisis like this, our main problem is an ethical dilemma. What values are we going to protect foremost, secondly, thirdly, because we have to make prioritizations. We don't have all the resources in the world to protect all stakeholders and all values. So that moral reasoning is the starting point, after which, as the situational awareness improves, these working groups can develop options and make some choices, trigger some action, and then see what the actions lead to. So as I said, these actions have to be quick, have to be decisive, but have to be compromise-like, meaning that they have to be subject to reassessment, so that what happens is action, but then reassessment, and jump back to the top of the loop. That the cycle that has to start again with the assessment of the priorities at stake. And these priorities can change place places during the crisis. So we have seen that in the COVID crisis. In the first stage, many countries decided to protect lives at all costs. But then the cost to the economy and the livelihoods of people have become visible. So the priorities are shifting to protect the economy. And at the same time, there are other values that came to the fore, values around equality and solidarity. And we are also talking about other values that are affected, perhaps a second order effect of this crisis, like the environment. What's good for the environment currently in terms of less carbon pollution is very bad for the economy, as it is. So these discussions, these values all need to be held at play. And as this crisis unfolds, we are realizing that potentially we are moving even beyond the territory of novel risks that crisis managers have experienced with, to an even newer territory that our very own sociologist here at Oxford University labeled wicked problems. So the picture there shows the late professor, unfortunately, Steve Reiner, who talked about the environmental issue as a wicked problem. But there is a certain fear that COVID-19 can turn into a wicked problem because of the sheer amount of stakeholders and uncertainty around it, and the fact that a solution is still not in sight, a solution that could satisfy all stakeholders is still eluding us. So once that uncertainty rises beyond what we have seen as risk managers and what we have seen as crisis managers, we are in the realm of wicked problems. And in this realm, we're gonna meet a new kind of problem. The discussion of risks becomes a matter of not only values, as I said, but also a matter of myth. We are in the territory of cultural anthropology. So I'm going to call on one of my previous mentors, Professor John Adams at the University of London, who talked about risk and risk perceptions, drawing on cultural anthropology. And his life's work was to show us that risk perception, for me, can be very different for risk perception, as you see it will, and every single person here. But roughly, we are falling into 4 cultural tribes. So according to John Adams, these 4 tribes are to do with the attitudes that we have towards risk, but underneath those attitudes, there are some core values, there are some prioritizations that we hold dear, that we are probably not even conscious of. Then that's the reason why we need to bring these underlying cultural attitudes forward so that we can have a discussion about why it is that the same risk is perceived so profoundly differently by different types of people.
Which way,
yes,
do you think the causation runs? I mean, do you think if you're a believer that nature is predictable, bountiful, robust, and stable, that actually nothing can go wrong and the harvest will come and there's no such thing as climate change? You can be individualistic.
Yes.
Are you individualistic, and that leads you to a view that nature must be benign?
It can go both ways. So the research has shown this association, but we haven't got the evidence for causality, which way it goes. But we have known, many cultural anthropologists have argued that there's a profound difference between people who are individualists, who believe that man was created to take control of nature, and then egalitarians, in their view, nature is fragile and precarious, and we have to look after it. And then there are attitudes around to what extent nature can be stable and benign to us. And experts claim there are some bounds within which we can rely on that stability. But if we breach those limits, then we are out of control. So then nature becomes hostile to us. And this is the climate scientist argument. We are approaching these planetary boundaries within which we can operate as business as usual. And once we breach these limits, then all bets are off. We are in new territories that could be potentially very damaging to us. But then there is another attitude out there, which is just fatalistic. Nature is what it is, nature is capricious, and nature is beyond our control. Now, you can substitute, you can take nature out and talk about public health, and then we come to these cultural types vis-a-vis COVID. Because the point of this categorization is that people display these different attitudes to particular risks. So in terms of COVID, what we see, an individualistic viewpoint would consider the economy as the primary value at stake here. And they would consider that probably public health-wise, we can contain this. And we saw these voices, we heard these voices when they talked about letting the pandemic blow through. The healthcare system will cope. That was the Swedish viewpoint, and originally that was voiced by Boris Johnson in the UK too. So let it blow through. The main value to protect is the economy. And there is a deeply held faith in technological fixes, in the ability of market forces and competition to contain risks. So this is roughly or falls in line with the neoliberalist view of political economy as well. The egalitarians in the face of COVID would take a very different approach. They would argue that public health is the #1 priority to defend. And they believe that the economy has to be strong enough, it will be strong enough to withstand this. So they would bring out a precautionary worldview that suggests that if the downside effects to public health are so severe as some of the predictions suggested they could be, then it is our duty, it is the government's duty to throw everything it has against this problem. The economy becomes secondary value and the public health becomes value #1. And we saw the UK switching to this view when we decided to save lives, stay at home and protect the NHS. The third view, the interventionists, these are the risk bearers who are looking to experts to give them the answer. And they believe that experts can give us the boundaries, the limits that would keep both the economy and both the public health issues at bay. There is here a greater faith in expertise than in the other cultural tribes, but also a greater faith in diplomacy, that problems like this, global problems like COVID, require international diplomacy and collaboration between different research groups. And finally, we see another type of voice in the COVID-19 crisis, the voice of fatalists. Or maybe we don't see their voice, but we see their actions. These are the people whose attitude to this COVID crisis is that it's largely beyond our control, possibly beyond science's control. In fact, quite a lot of fatalists have a deeply felt suspicion about science, a kind of anti-science attitude that's also being stoked by anti-science political interest too. And then there could be attitudes of apathy, and then attitudes of cynicism and attitudes of devil-may-care, which is what we have seen to some extent on display on the Bono speech 2 weeks ago. Now, the existence of attitudes like this is a major policy challenge for the other tribes who want to intervene. So one of the key questions is what to do given that people with different cultural makeup would expect different policy responses to take place. And one answer to that is that we expect to see an emergence of combinations of these different types of worldviews. First, there could be individual reactions. So if the marketeers lead the charge, then they would let it blow through. If the egalitarians lead the charge, then there is a wholesale public health reaction of trying to contain the virus. But over time, as we experiment with exit strategies, it's going to be a combination when these different tribes have to start talking to each other and come up with compromises. And that's what we are seeing currently in the UK, where we are both trying to navigate the public health challenge and the economic challenge. So it's creating these combinations in creative ways that will make the responses so different across countries, but also across companies that are also facing the same dilemmas, protecting employees from health risk, but also restarting their own economic operations. The problem is that once you start getting these views together and getting the dialogue going, you will see the conflict which is imposed by the cultural makeup of these different voices and cultural tribes. So how do we manage in situations like this? The first thing to understand is that this is not something unusual and abhorrent. This is not something that's dysfunctional. This is to do with us being humans. As Ian McEwan, the writer, says, we are a quarrelsome species. As the Oxford philosopher Isaiah Berlin identified, we live in value pluralism. We have deeply held multiple values, some of which are irreconcilable with each other. So this conflict is part of the problem, and an acknowledgement that these conflicts exist is really part of the solution too. And then once we understand that this contestation is essential, we can start perhaps guiding a process that would allow this conflict to be harnessed in constructive ways. Now, there are some principles that would help us along the way. One of them is Isaiah Berlin's own principle, minimizing the extremes of suffering. And I guess this is what you see in action when the Chancellor comes forward with a stimulation plan formulated around the notion of we want to minimize the extremes of economic suffering with this particular intervention. So the idea is to maintain these set of values over time and try to harness the conflict for companies as well in order to generate new ideas and innovation out of these situations. Now, as I said, solutions that are good enough, speedy enough, and make a difference are okay. Patches are okay because we are making temporary compromises as we are muddling through. They happen more likely if we also empower lower levels of decision making. So for example, in a company that's just experimenting with reopening its stores, it makes sense to get employees involved in the hows of how we're gonna make this workplace safe and also operational. So a new type of management would also draw on new kind of processes that this COVID situation requires. And we are noting now that some companies have started bottom-up communications to check all these priorities at play among their own employees. A case study that I have been conducting with a Swiss public company suggests that giving employees voice through a simple app like this one, for example, and asking them to speak up about the priorities and the issues that frustrate the achievement of the priorities or purpose of their operations is actually very beneficial. And it has brought much benefit to the company in terms of empowering the silent majority who comes forward not only with complaints, but also about ideas that would help this company to live its espoused values and priorities. So for example, in the COVID-19 situation, safety becomes a #1 priority for many more companies than in normal times. This company happens to be a high reliability electricity company, so safety is a #1 objective, which is why it's interesting to look at, because now for my own business school, safety becomes a #1 objective too. So once you have a clear priority like that, you can ask employees, what do you see around you that could frustrate this priority? What ideas do you have to help us make this a safety #1, so safety first working environment? And this is in the context of another societal trend, the emergence of the purposeful corporation. So when we see this the possibility of empowering employee voice to bring about particular cultures, particular priorities in an organization, we see that these practices are potentially the practices that purposeful companies need in order to keep track of their purpose beyond this crisis. And that the pull comes not only from stakeholders outside the company who want to see if the espoused values and priorities are actually lived, but they come from important corporate governance circles, such as directors. So here you can see the chairman of the Swiss Great Board, who is voicing something relatively novel for board directors. They need to know what's going on in the operations, in the sense, if a company says safety is number one, and service delivery is number second, and say cost is a number three issue, then the board of directors want to see if that really is the case in action. And if it isn't, if they see that the evidence suggests that the priorities are the other way around, as we see in many man-made disasters where cost came first, service delivery second, and because of this, a lot of employees cut corners on safety, then there are some profound changes that are needed. So we see this new recognition that the employee voice could help companies not just bring about process improvement, but also to be able to hold itself accountable for the purposes and the values it espouses. So the challenge that we face in COVID-19 and beyond COVID-19 is this understanding that novel risks and wicked problems require a new type of management and the potential democratization of the workforce, so the workplace. Thank you. I think I'm going to stop here, just giving you one quote from F. Scott Fitzgerald that I like very much. This problem is not just a problem a challenge to the imagination, but also a challenge to our own intelligence. But as Fitzgerald said, the test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold two opposed ideas in mind and still retain the ability to function. For us, the two becomes multiple. Thank you very much.
Annette, thank you. Thank you. I mean, I think all of us watching this, I'm sure there'll be more questions coming up, but I mean, of course, I mean, one obvious question to you, and it jumps us into the realms of public policy almost immediately, but and it picks up on your last few slides about kind of distributed leadership and decentralized leadership and looking for kind of active voices from below. I mean, one of the observations that people have made about the, it's slightly hackneyed, but nonetheless, I think insightful, between this so far successful response in Germany and the response in Britain has been that, I mean, there's obviously been mistakes being made in both countries, but I mean, the big mistake made in Britain was actually our response has been highly centralized.
Yes.
I mean, we have not really, and we're still not releasing data. I mean, mayors, I mean, I think the Westminster mayor, Andy Street, and the Manchester mayor is a Labour man against the Conservative in West Midlands. It's a Labour man in Manchester. Both complain that they haven't been given access to public health data. There's not actually been the public health England is highly centralized, and actually it's been a major mistake. I mean, whereas in Germany, they've used their decentralized health system to actually customize solutions at local level. Now, do you believe that? I mean, I guess you must be given your analysis, but do you want to build on it?
Yes, I think I would go along with that. So centralization is very useful in the face of routine problems to which we can develop efficient responses and routinized response. But as we slide from the territory of routine risk to novel risks, centralization becomes a bit of a bind. In fact, when we need innovation to cope with the different novel aspects of this situation, then centralization becomes positively harmful because it stops innovation, it stops responses coming up from where the problems, the different faces of the problem are met. So I agree with you. And as we move towards the territory of wicked problems, again, decentralization becomes even more important. And that's why I keep emphasizing that empowering lower levels of decision making becomes more likely successful response, simply because the leaders cannot know it all. The other aspect of this is transparency. So what you were mentioning, incident management teams that I showed you, they are out to have an oversight over the problem, the incident, the situation as a whole, but they need to create some transparency and share that oversight, share information with other layers of the governance system. So I agree with you. That transparency issue is also an important element. And without transparency, we don't have the proper information flow that can foster innovation.
Did you ever come across the famous Prussian general Moltke?
Yes.
No, very interesting figure actually. Because I remember about going to Sandhurst. Now, well, I didn't do a Sandhurst year, but I remember I spent a couple of days there, observationally. And the British Army were very taken by the success of the Prussian generals in the Franco-German War of 1870, in which Moltke's view, and it builds completely on where you are from, he said, strategically, when you're briefing your army commanders, you can say the objective is to take that hill, and the objective is to take that hill by mid-afternoon. But actually, when you are on the ground, the taking of the hill, must be delegated, and how it's done, to the individual captains and actually kind of commanders on the ground. They can't. And they developed a system of decentralized decision-making in the Prussian army that they regarded as central to its success. And the British Army has been enormously impressed by that. And actually, one of the things they teach at kind of Sandhurst is this kind of, think strategically, certainly, but actually you've got to give even your platoon commander the capacity to take to manage actually the military risk that he or she sees in front of him or her. So it's your point. I thought you might. I
do appreciate it.
You might be amused by that.
I am amused, but it also resonates with the experience I have from research with the Royal Navy. And historically, the Royal Navy operated under the principles of decentralization too, just simply because a Royal Navy captain was alone, couldn't ask for instructions from London. So by default, they had to be empowered. Now, to your point of centralization, once an organization or a country has an experience of a problem and worked out an efficient response or a workable response to it, it can start routinize it, and that potentially brings back the benefits of centralization. And I think that's what we have seen in South Korea. South Korea leadership has had experience with the SARS virus outbreak some 10 years ago, and they started to invest in the kind of public health features, the tracing and testing technology that enabled them to clamp down on this virus relatively fast and trace and track relatively efficiently. So that is a centralized system that operates well because it already acquired some experience that we are just in the process of gathering. So we probably would need more decentralization to foster a better understanding and potentially more ideas to emerge, which then later we can routinize and centralize.
There's a number of questions which are
Yes.
Which are coming up here, but I'm one more question from me, and then I'm going to bring in questions from our audience. You mentioned the COVID group that I chair at Hertford, which has been met systematically throughout the crisis, and we're in constant touch, as you said, with the other kind of overarching groups. One of the things that's kind of really vexing us, this Michaelmas term that's coming, is how effective can a testing, contact testing, tracing, and isolate regime be. Have you any insights that you'd like, while you're on the line, I can talk,
yes.
but have you any insights? I mean, how do you, and how could those be reproduced nationally? I mean, if we had an effective testing, tracking, and isolating regime, I think our economy would be, and people would be greatly more confident. Consumers, employees, everyone would be more confident. Yeah. What conclusion do you draw from your analysis? If you were sitting in front of Boris Johnson, Dominic Cummings, what would you tell them now?
I would say, be careful about making bets on untested technologies. We are in uncertain terrains here. So we need to have a backup solution to it. We need to be able to say, okay, this is the scenario that you're working for. We don't know if this technology is going to work because there's so many uncertainties around it. It really depends on the adoption rate, what trust people build up around it, and the behavior reactions to it are completely unpredictable. So I would be careful with making promises of how it's going to work. It's more like an experiment to see if we can contain the virus by locating people through this technology. But we need to have some other ways, other ways of protecting people and protecting safety at universities and workplaces. And we need to be really creative and just think about parallel innovations working alongside each other. And one of them will be more effective than another. So I would say, right, you have got one innovation, one alternative that's starting now, and we'll see in action whether it works or not or how efficient it is. But I would like you to have a plan B and the plan C as well. And start rolling out other ways of dealing with this. And one of these innovations might just take us there more efficiently. So for example, other countries have been, it's not really a technology, but it's another way of tackling this crisis, asking people to wear face masks. And that became a preventative measure that seems to be containing the virus in countries where people are adhering to the behavioral expectation of wearing your face mask. So experiment with that as well more forcefully. And there could be other ways that we can try to contain this.
There's one questioner here, just speaking about face masks. Makes the point, Michael John Clark. He says he calculates that the COVID death toll in the United States is equivalent to almost 3 9/11s per week. Al-Qaeda attack led to kind of, war. In the face of COVID, most sides of the Atlantic, you can't bother to wear a mask. I mean, it's one in something like 15 or 20% of the British wear a mask, and it's even a lower proportion in the States, much higher proportions in continental.
Yes.
I mean, how do you, again, I mean, why is this response so different? Is that your individualistic, egalitarian typology?
Yes, that's what I'm thinking. So it has to be going back on the one hand to our different cultural makeup. And I was thinking about, we are more individualistic. We don't like that kind of imposition. But then when you think about it from a leadership point of view, there could be some behavioral policy nudges and ways of communication that could increase the compliance rate with these potentially really desirable measures. So the way we communicate also influences adoption rate of these measures. So if you think about President Trump talking about wear a face mask, but himself refusing to be seen in one, that sends a very clear behavioral signal that even the president doesn't accept this behavioral measure, so why should I? So any kind of behavioral signal has to be consistent with the narrative, and as soon as that consistency is broken, the trust in that measure breaks as well.
Winston Churchill, during the Blitz, would only conduct a meeting if all the members of the meeting wore gas masks, and he himself wore a gas mask. He insisted on it. And giving so there you are. Boris Johnson's hero wore a gas mask during the Blitz and didn't know no nonsense. He would allow people to join the meeting if they didn't wear a gas. I mean, extraordinary actually.
So if you want people to wear a face mask,
Yeah.
You have to wear it. You have to be seen as wearing it. The other way to do it is actually talk about responsibility and values. And I said, leadership here is not about giving us the answers because they cannot possibly know. This is too novel for them to have certainties. Their job is to somehow create the processes through which we're going to learn and model through, but also to signal the values that we are protecting here. So if there is value confusion coming from the top, that again frustrates these needed behavioral responses. So is it clear enough to people that by wearing a face mask, they are protecting not necessarily just themselves, they are protecting others. They are protecting, you know, elder citizens or vulnerable citizens, their own grandparents. Has that been communicated clearly enough? I think that's a leadership task, and we need to look into ourselves. Do we actually get those messages, and are we able to take those messages?
There's an early question which I think I should put to you on your what is at stake slide. Mm-hmm. Would it ever be possible to come up with a government response that addresses all of those points? If not, how could governments prioritize their responses?
Yeah, so the prioritization, I guess this is the role of the governments being responsive. So they need to respond, they need responsive and able to learn. So as our situational awareness increases, we will see, we perceive different pressure points. We perceive where the extremes of suffering are. And using Isaiah Berlin's principle, their job would be to look out for the extremes of suffering and try to tackle those.
Actually, I was amused by you citing Isaiah Berlin, because I knew him quite well towards the end of his life. He certainly would have approved of you and what you're saying. And what about and similarly, Ian McEwan, actually, it's also intriguingly someone I know quite well, but anyway, and he would also approve, I think. I'd like to ask you, actually, well, let's go to more of these questions, and I'll ask you, I've got a question I think you have to be asked, but I thought there was an important one here from Gavin. One of the obvious differences between the financial crisis and this one is how much less of a cooperative global approach. How does this difference relate to government's approach to risk?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I mean, this falls into the realm of crisis that would require, according to the experts, would require international collaboration. But what we get is this fragmentation. And I think Gavin would agree with me that we are in a geopolitically very different environment than we were 10 years ago when we faced the global financial crisis. Also, the global financial crisis was delegated much more to experts, to central banks to deal with, as we see it in the magnificent book of Adam Toole about how this crisis was handled. There was an international collaboration of central bankers that was able to intervene. We don't see that international collaboration of public health authorities, unfortunately. And I would suggest that there are political reasons for that. We are in a very different terrain, and we've got very different leaders around the world.
Is there any way to predict what the next big risks are going to be? The next black swan, maybe the next perfect tsunami? I mean, it would be great if we get a handle on that. How can governments, how can governments plan more effectively?
Yes. So I guess the next big one has been predicted to us. So it's not a black swan. I'm thinking of climate crisis, and it's kind of rearing its head. It's there, and the ecological crisis that goes with it. What hasn't happened, there hasn't been a real wide-scale, wide-reaching acknowledgement that there is another global problem there, which requires a global response. And that's going to be similar in magnitude in terms of major government interventions will be needed, major reconfiguration of economies, and also of value system, of what we consider of value. And from my point of view as an accounting professor, it will need a major reconfiguration of what we consider as performance, as good, profitable, sustainably profitable performance. So for me, it's the climate crisis. That's the next big one, but it's already outside the door. It's at the gates.
I mean, if I suppose, we take you to the cabinet to meet Michael Gove, allegedly not allegedly, I mean, regarded by many as the chief executive of this administration, and we got you an hour in front of Michael Gove. How would you use this analysis to kind of guide what the government should do over the next 3, 6, 9 months?
So first of all, I would suggest some more humility and more innovation, more creativity in responses. Multiple channels of innovation I would like to be in place, multiple types of responses and constant vigilance of where the new ideas, the new solutions are emerging. So that would be the short-term response. Secondly, much more transparency and much more decentralization. So people who are affected by decisions of reopening the economy should be empowered to come up with creative ideas of how they would be involved in the COVID-19 environment. Because we're not going to return to normal. The COVID-19 world is going to be our new normal. And what we have to figure out is how to operate a successful economy while we're still living with COVID-19, while there is still no vaccine in sight. So there's no solution in sight yet. So this adjustment to the new normal requires a sense of urgency, but also a sense of empowerment for people to be able to be part of this. And then the third thing I would suggest, whatever interventions the government takes on a really large scale, try to take it in a way that it already prepares us for the next big one. So ideas about building back better or building back greener are the ones to listen to. I mean, this is, once the government opens its purse to the extent it starts doing now, this is an amazing opportunity to also tackle the climate crisis by investing in a new kind of economy, creating jobs in the renewable energy sector, tackling the pressures coming from interest groups on the fossil fuel side, and saying no to certain types of interest groups in order to rejuvenate the economy, to be really the kind of economy that's able to cope with the next big one, which is the climate crisis. Also, we have got problems of inequality. So again, as we are using this government purse, we have to think about the ideas that have been put forth by economists like our very own Paul Collier of how to rejuvenate the left behind regions of different countries, right? Tackling the economic crisis that we have, but also tackling the inequality issues that we have been having for decades now. So one way to look at this crisis for the government is look at it as a major opportunity. You're intervening, so intervene in a way that you're solving not one, but at least 3 big problems.
We had some of that yesterday. I mean, we've got, the home insulation program, the big green investment infrastructure. I mean, within the 30 billion package yesterday that Chancellor Sunak announced, it wasn't overwhelming, but it was a significant green down payment. Peter Friend asks, but we have some decentralization of decision making. Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland have made their own decisions. And isn't it working well for them? Is that working well? I mean, Nicola Sturgeon.
Yeah. Time will tell. Yeah, by structure of the UK government system, of course, there are those different responses.
Well, there's no deaths in Scotland. No deaths in Scotland, and only 3 deaths in Wales. I think no deaths in Northern Ireland. I mean, just to say.
So, Will, you raised the issue of decentralization, and I think you meant it public health decentralization, and more to the level of cities, so mayors can make decisions individually. So yes, we can go beyond with decentralization. And as we operate this switch of lockdown and easing up gradually, these operations, by nature, are becoming more and more decentralized because the flare-ups that we see are quite localized. So when we see the mayor of Leicester clamping down again, or we see Melbourne clamping down on COVID and outbreaks, then we see that decentralization in action.
Here we've got someone anonymously, I think very intriguing. He says, or she says, I've been overseeing the COVID response for a large, complex organization. I found myself smiling at the framework you provided for iterative, agile problem solving. I think spending some time thinking about the theory would have sped up our response. Do you have any sense at all of the scale of benefit and speed or outcome of a more, inverted commas, professional, close inverted commas, response management that could underpin resource allocation to invest in such capabilities? How could you, if you want to make a business case for making yourself a kind of iterative, agile problem solver, what would you do? Give us some sense of it.
Yes, so it doesn't necessarily require a huge investment in a process that we never had before. It's really a reconfiguration of how decisions are being made by creating an oversight group, which we did almost instantly from 1 hour to the next. At Hertford College, Will created this oversight group, and most organizations have been able to do that. And it's just, it's really their time that becomes the main resource when they meet daily or weekly, depending on the speed of evolution of the situation. And then as they identify the different areas that they need to learn more about in order to get situational awareness or increase situational awareness, they need to bring in information from different subject matter groups. So the cost associated with it depends on whether you have the expertise in place already or whether you have to call on expertise from outside the organization. So we are at Hertford College, we are calling on expertise that's available to us from the university at large, right? We are using our own public health and medical experts to advise us. And I think organizations can do that, because you have got your own groups, associations, industry level, and potentially beyond, where you can draw in expertise and set up that process structure that I showed. A structure is needed to create this innovative and iterative decision process. So then you have to think about who is in that working group that has the oversight. There could be others alongside it that are notified on a need-to-know basis about the decisions and the thinking of that group. And it becomes a structural issue that depends on the size of your organization, of how many people are involved at the daily level and how many are involved on a need-to-know basis. We find at Harvard, at Saïd Business School, that on a need-to-know basis, all of us are being informed on a weekly basis by our own chief executive, the dean of the business school, in order to create the transparency that's needed for us to figure out how we can come up with creative responses. And
lots of companies are indulging in woke capitalism, asks somebody. They're making small but high-profile changes to appear that they're addressing inequality at a systemic level, when actually it's token gesture. Is that approach motivated by risk management?
Yeah. Well, some people abuse risk management principles by using it to clamp down on pressure points with token reactions, but that's not what I was talking about. So if I had the opportunity to advise the government, I would say they have a genuine opportunity to leverage this crisis into effectively reforming capitalism. Our current capitalism is not the same as it was a year ago. It's already changed. Historians will be telling to what extent it has just been a token change. But I have the feeling that with this level of government intervention and government control, the government actually has a major say in how purposeful organizations will become. Some governments are requiring companies to do something in exchange for the support that they are receiving that goes beyond just quick economic recovery. Those expectations on these companies could be about making real commitments to environmental regeneration or decarbonization or better treatment of their employees or the communities that they operate in. So I would say the government now has a voice, now has got power over corporations that normally, in the normal functioning of capitalism, it wouldn't have. So we'll see what they're going to do with it. I know that they are exercising these muscles in New Zealand, for example, in quite different ways. So New Zealand is taking a much more decisive step towards job creation in the renewable industries or renewable energy industries. So our current investment in that is dwarfed by what we see in New Zealand or what we see in Germany or what the European Union is trying to come up with. So it's important to see the experience of other countries as well and then benchmark ourselves.
Someone here, Rose Jackson, she asks, where the core value that governments have a primary duty to protect their citizens has been visibly violated, is there a real risk that the social contract between government and people has been irreparably violated? I mean, do you think, again, from, that's a very interesting question. It has a number of dimensions. I mean, I won't point you, I mean, I've got a way I'd answer it. Over to you, how are you going to answer it?
Well, you can answer it as well because you are the economist of the two of us. I would say, you know, from my viewpoint of risk management, there's always that risk. I mean, the challenge of leadership is to remain authentic and to be able to credibly advocate the espoused values, the core values, and stay accountable for prioritizing values accordingly. And that accountability is really important. Most of the time, I guess, we don't have enough transparency. But this COVID situation brought into the light that, yeah, there are some anomalies out there. Now, the question is that on balance, does this government or do governments come out with credibility at the end, or they kind of deplete the credibility fund, the trust, equity that citizens have placed in them? And I would say that we will see. It's too early to say that because it's a process.
Let's sign off. The last question I think we should put to you, which was asked very early on, and I think it allows you to kind of pull your ideas together. So in an era of increasing exposure to novel risks, what characteristics of leadership development should be prioritized? Mm-hmm. And do they differ materially from those relevant to the last 30 years? I mean,
profoundly.
So go on, it gives you a chance to, open your shoulders and kind of, go for it. Go.
Yeah, okay. I would just probably try to hone in on three things. So the first thing is I would deprioritize the shareholder value primacy notion that has been the fundamental underlying conception of the role and responsibility of managers.
Did you see that Danone has written that its purpose is not profit maximization, but life, health, to offer a healthy life. I can't read the exact phrase, but I mean, it's an extraordinary, it's the first leading public company to actually change its article of association to say our purpose is the delivery of health.
You're talking about Danone or?
Yeah, Danone.
Yes, Danone, yeah. Yes, but we have seen the likes of these companies before. Merck, the American pharmaceutical company, was famously created to put patients first. Johnson & Johnson is a very similar company with a belief, the founders in these companies more than 100 years ago believed that if patients come first, then profits will follow. So we have seen the likes of purposeful companies before. What happened later in the 60s, 70s was the rise of institutions and institutional expectations that led to this short-termism and managers chasing short-term profits and short-term profit maximization at the expense of more long-term perspectives, and as it turns out, at the expense of future generations that are we. So we are paying for that now, and our children will be paying for the mistakes of our generation in this space. So the first thing is to get away from this short-termism, the shareholder value privacy. At the Saïd Business School, we advocate a much more stakeholder-oriented view and trying to figure out what it means for corporations to be truly purposeful and sustainable. So as that knowledge is developing and we are seeing successes in this space, we would like to codify these practices that are emerging and teach the new generation of managers. That's going to be your new challenge, and these are the examples that you have in front of you. But the current generation will have to be much more creative and innovative, because we are looking to them to find the ways of commercializing those technologies, for example, that we need for the renewable energy transition. And then we haven't mentioned the ecological crisis. So how we use natural resources responsibly is still something that we have to figure out, both practice-wise and accounting-wise. So the second thing is, I don't think managers can do this just by looking at financial and accounting information. So we need to link that knowledge, that financial appraisal of value, with an ethical appraisal of value. So this building a bridge between financial and managerial accounting and risk management expertises and business ethics is a major challenge. And I think that's the second component in a new skill set for leaders. And then the third bit, I would suggest is institutional entrepreneurship. So by this I mean that some of the problems that we face in COVID and beyond COVID, and particularly with the climate crisis, are bigger than any company can solve alone. That doesn't give excuse, we believe, for leaders to just step back and wait for the governments to solve the problem or for the regulators to solve the problem. One thing that leaders can do and could be expected to do increasingly is to engage in changing the rules of the game. Change the rules of the game that it would make it really beneficial for you to invest in renewable energy type transformations or in decarbonization. So to do that, whole accounting frameworks need to change.
You are the revolutionary, Annette. We're going to look at you to... You're
well, we believe that leaders, corporate leaders have powers. They have had lobbying powers for decades. They have been using that power in a very self-serving way to increase short-term profitability. If they are purposeful leaders, they need to use that lobbying power to build the institutions that we need to make these reforms not just possible and feasible, but also the valued way of going forward.
Well, look, I mean, we're approaching 6:15, where we promised we would wrap it up. I have to say, I know you well enough to know that you're a very, driven woman, and you are, and you're in a position to at the business school and in Oxford to develop the kind of accounting framework that you advocate. And I think everyone watching is going to watch very closely to see whether you manage that. If you can pull that off, you've done a great thing. But I want to thank you on behalf of everybody. I mean, really, I don't know. I mean, risk management in the COVID pandemic. It's interesting. I mean, you introduced us to it's a primer in actually how to think about risk, novel risks, and wicked problems, clumsy solutions. Go for clumsy solutions. Look for the bottom up. Be agile. I mean. I guess much of it is common sense, but what's not common sense is putting it together in the way that you have done. So thank you very much for that. Really illuminating and insightful. And a wonderful slide deck, which so thank you very much. And the last of the Hertford Responds is going to be by yours truly. And I think I'm giving. I think I'll bring in Sarah here from the development office. Actually, Sarah, what? Is it, I think it's Thursday. When is it?
It's 2 weeks from now. So it's on Thursday, the 23rd of July. And yeah, we're all very much looking forward to it, Will. Last chance to hear from you for a lot of people.
I wonder whether my slide deck will be as good as, I have to put some slides up, actually.
I must say, you've got a lot to live up to after all the other ones.
just have to learn to share my screen and do it. Anyway, look, it's been wonderful, and thank you all very much for joining us. Sarah, do you want to say something? And Annette, do you want to say something? And otherwise, we should wrap it all up.
I just want to say thank you for giving me this platform. And yes, I will continue in this vein. And of course, I don't know how much, who our audience is and how many people know that you're graciously and gracefully retiring. But I do hope that you're going to stay in the game and a major engine to the purposeful company movement. So if you stay the course, I'm going to be there to support you.
I support you, Annette.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's mutual love in here. No, I really, yeah, I mean, I'm sorry that I'm stepping out of Hertford as you step in, but I mean, we can carry on making common cause, no.
That's right.
All right, very good. Well, Sarah, let's wrap it up. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening in and joining us. I hope you enjoyed it. I certainly did. Okay.
Thank you.
And thank you, Annette. Okay.
Thanks,
Okay.
everyone.
Bye. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.